Hi, welcome back to my channel if you've been here before. If you haven't, I'm Gemma, I talk about books, and today I am going to share my Spooky Season TBR. So I don't normally make TBRs. I am very much a mood reader. I sometimes have an idea of what I want to read over the course of the next few weeks, but I'm very much, if I change my mind, I pick something else. This definitely changes though around this time of year. I definitely get into the vibe of spooky season, which to me isn't just around Halloween. Spooky season for me starts beginning of October and goes all the way through pretty much to the end of November. It's that entire transitional period of autumn into winter. It's about cozy jumpers, warm blankets, hot drinks, wanting to hibernate despite the fact that everybody else tells you that you still have to go to work and do the boring stuff. And the books that I choose match the season and that whole wanting to be cozy but scared at the same time. So I have 12 books that I am going to talk about. Now, whether I read all of these 12 books is a completely different matter, partly because of time, but also, as I say, I am a mood reader, so there may be a couple that I decide to swap out and not read, and I'll pick something else instead. But we shall just have to wait and see for my October and November wrap-ups to see just whether or not I actually stuck to this TBR, because it's not guaranteed. If you have been watching my videos, then you will know that I have been reading Stephen King books in chronological order, and the next book that I am due to read is Skeleton Crew, which is a short story collection, but the first story is The Mist, which is just pure atmosphere. I have read it before, so this will be a reread. I haven't read any of the other stories in the collection though, so I am looking forward to getting to them. So I will be reading that first in October. I really enjoy short story collections, mostly because they are so hit and miss. You can absolutely love some of the stories and then be bitterly disappointed by others. And there's really no way of telling what's going to happen. It's a very different reading experience to just picking up novels. I don't know anything about the other short stories, so I will be going into them completely blind, but we shall see how they go. Sticking with the theme of Stephen King, the next book that I want to read in October, and really I would love to finish this before Halloween, is It. I have never read it, and it is definitely on my list of books that I am actually scared to read, because for a start it's a big chunky beast, but also because I do know what it's about, and it's actually the book that is the reason why my mum hates Stephen King. She hates horror in general, and she really hates clowns. And even though I love horror, it's always been the one that sits on shelves and I am a little bit scared to go near. However, because I'm reading them in order, it's coming up and it's due in this month, so I'm gonna have to read it. So the next book that I want to read is Once and Future Witches by Alex Harrow. I was actually gifted this book and I feel really bad that I haven't actually gotten around to reading it yet, so I am going to try and make a conscious effort to do so. I don't know a huge amount about this. I think it's about women's empowerment, women's rights, obviously about witches. I don't know whether the women are actual, like, magical witches or whether they are just being accused of being witches. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to finding out. I don't actually own a huge amount of books about witches that are fictional. I have some books that are non-fiction, about sort of the treatment of women who were being accused of being witches and the sort of the social history side of things, but I don't own a huge amount of fictional books about witches, mostly because a huge amount of the ones that I have seen have been YA, and that's not really something that I'm into, so I am really looking forward to reading something that's aimed more at adults with that as a theme, and it just seems like the perfect time of year to get into that one. So I really wanted to include a non-fiction in this list. I have been attempting to read at least one a month, and so the one I've picked for this time of year is Death and the Afterlife by Clifford Pickover. And I saw this and just thought it looked so much fun, and the cover is stunning, and it is, from what I can gather, it is about different societies and cultures around the world, how they look at and react to death, how they celebrate, how they remember the dead, what they do in terms of funerals, how they actually treat the bodies after death. It just seems like a really interesting read. I've always been a little bit fascinated on how different parts of the world do different things, and the subject of death and funerals is weirdly interesting to me. So as we get closer to Halloween, I thought what better than to read a book about vampires. But instead of picking Dracula, which I think was the obvious choice, I have gone for a book that was written before that, and I have gone for Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. I have not read this. I don't actually know what it's about, apart from the fact that it was one of the original vampire stories ever written, and that it is more female focused. Otherwise, I don't know anything about it. I'm going in completely blind, but I know that it is very, very well known, and I just want to read it myself. I just want to get to it. So I wanted to find some books that were set around Halloween or had a real autumnal vibe. And one that I picked up is Ghost Road Blues by Jonathan Maybury. Now, I don't know for sure if this is actually set during Halloween or around Halloween. I was led to believe that it is, but I will find out when I actually go to read it. What attracted me to this, though, is that it is small town American horror. There's very much a folklore element to it, and there seems to be a real sense of an entire community sort of suffering and being punished for the actions of somebody else, maybe. But just that small town horror I love. So as I say, I don't know whether this is actually set around Halloween, but somebody described it to me and it just ticked all the boxes, and I immediately thought I want to read that in October. A book that I got recently, which is set around Halloween, is Season of Mist by Paul Finch. And this is actually set in the UK. And again, it's a community in a small town. They all love celebrating Halloween every single year. But this year it's different because there is a killer on the loose. I mean, what else could you want at Halloween? It sounds like the perfect read. So another book that I added that I don't think is set around Halloween, but it just had all of the creepy, scary horror vibes that I am looking for, is Kin by Keelan Patrick Burke. Now, I have become a massive fan of this guy. I have only actually read his novellas. Kin is either his only or one of his few actual novels that he's written, and so I'm really looking forward to getting to this, particularly as well because it is supposed to be absolutely horrific and terrifying. I've read a couple of reviews about this and it has been described as truly terrifying, not just scary but terrifying. From what I can gather, it is a proper slasher, serial killer, everybody's getting hacked apart story. I think one of the reviews I read described it as a mix of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Deliverance, which, I mean, Just that description alone makes me want to read this book. Another book that I was gifted in the last year, which I haven't gotten around to reading yet, was Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. Now, I have not read this author before. I don't know a lot about this book. From what I can gather from reading the synopsis, we basically have a group of horror writers who are invited to go and stay in a haunted house. And it starts off as supposed to be like a publicity stunt, and there's lots of press attention around it, but then it becomes something much, much worse when people start dying. Now, I love me a haunted house story. I also love reading about writers, and reading a horror novel centred around horror writers just sounds pure fun. So I then decided that I wanted to throw in a writer that I have heard so much about, but I have not read a huge amount of. And so I have decided to add in The Final Girls Support Group by Grady Hendrix. I have only ever read one of his books, and I have heard a lot of mixed reviews about this one. So this is essentially about the final girls, the people who are the last ones to survive when a serial killer is on the loose. And this is the support group for those people. They are, traumatized, they're in therapy, and they have been helping each other through their recovery. But then one of the members of the group fails to turn up, and it turns out that there is somebody who knows about their group and has decided to start picking them off all over again. I love a good slasher film. I'm actually a real wimp when it comes to horror films, but I do like a good slasher, and I like the cheesiness and the campness and the fun. I don't like horror films that are too serious and are just terrifying. I like there to be an element of fun, if that makes sense. And despite the fact that I have heard very mixed reviews about this book, it does just seem fun. And from what I have read of Grady Hendrix, he does have a real fun, humorous way to his writing. So I thought that would make a good addition to this TBR. So then we find ourselves going into winter, and I wanted to find some books that had that cold, isolated, wintry feel to get into the mood. And so I've picked a couple. One of them is Thin Air by Michelle Paver. Now, I did read Dark Matter that she wrote, and I didn't love it. It was okay, and it had the cold, isolated, spooky feel, but I didn't find it as creepy and as scary as it was described and what I've heard other people say about it. So I kind of felt like I'd missed something. With this is the same sort of vibe. This is a group of people going and climbing a mountain in the Himalayas, I believe. And I don't really know anything else about it. I know nothing else about this book apart from the fact that they are climbing a mountain in the cold, in the dark, and it seems like a very stupid thing to do. And then the final book that I have added to this TBR is The Terror by Dan Simmons. I really want to get to this. I have not read any Dan Simmons before. I've heard very mixed reviews about this book. Some people seem to absolutely love it, and then others say that it just didn't do it for them at all. I have been fascinated about the story of John Franklin for years, and there's a really bizarre reason for this, but I will tell you anyway. If you are, I'm going to say, of a certain age, and you remember a TV series called Due South back in the 90s about a Canadian Mountie, the very last 2 episodes referenced John Franklin and the story of him going off across the Northwest Passage and disappearing. The entire group of people that he was with, their 2 ships, disappeared. This whole story told in a TV show back in the 90s has stuck with me ever since. And I do actually own a couple of non-fiction books about Franklin and his ship and the whole expedition. When I heard that there was this book and I actually only heard about this when the BBC made a TV series. I went a little mad, but I just have not been able to fit this in and get the time to really sit down and read this book. So I am definitely going to read this book at some point before the end of the year. I really want to try and get it in before December, because I kind of have plans for what I want to read in December in the lead up to Christmas. But this book will be read at some point in the winter, because as much as I know that this is a fictionalized account and that there is a horror kind of creature feature element added in, I really just want to read this story. But I'm kind of obsessed, and it all started with my love for a fictional Canadian Mountie. So that is my Spooky Season TBR. As I say, we will just have to wait and see as to whether or not I actually read all of these books. I would love to know, though, what you have planned for the next couple of months. So I hope you are all well. I will be back with